I am pleased to welcome our first panelist today, Mary Kirk, who is a middle school math teacher with Putnam County Schools in Tennessee. Welcome, Mary. Thanks for being here. And Mary is joined today by Carl Hooker, who is an author, speaker, and educator out of Texas. Welcome, Carl. Good to see you. And lastly, we have Harrison Parker, who is Vice President of Operations for NetRef, joining us from the DC area. So welcome, everybody. I think, Harrison, you're going to kick us off. I think you're muted, Harrison.
Thanks very much, Emily. And thanks, Mary and Carl, for joining us today. What we wanted to do was just give you a quick run through of NetRef so you could have a chance to see exactly what our program is about. But more importantly, rather than listen to myself and anyone from our team talk about it, we invited Mary Kirk, who is one of our partner schools that works with us in Tennessee, to let you know a little bit about how she uses it. We also invited Carl Hooker here, who is an expert in the education technology field, to give everyone a little bit more insight about what we've been seeing across the country, maybe not just locally in your area, but across the country and even the world. Talk about what challenges we've faced, and then also how we can combat those moving into next year as we look to transition back to in-person learning. So, Mary, why don't I pass it back over to you? And if you would, tell us a little bit about your school and your classroom and what you've faced this past school year.
Sure. So I am from Cookeville, Tennessee. So that's Middle Tennessee for those of you who are familiar with it. I teach at Prescott South Middle School. So we serve about 800 students in the county. And we have, we're housed with 5 through 8, so 5th through 8th grade. I teach high school math in the middle school. So integrated math 1 and 2 placed in the middle school. It's similar to dual credit, high school to college. So I'll have about half a class of 7th and 8th graders, and occasionally a few 6th graders at any given time, 2 courses in the same classroom. So it's integrated 1 math and integrated math 2. So our population, we're a Title I school, so we have over 50% of low income that we service, and that's about the dynamics of our school. Harrison, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's great. And I was going to say, before we jump into NetRef, I did just want to point out to those that were on the call as we're getting started. We're going to switch gears, and I'll share my screen, and Mary was just going to talk a little bit about how she uses it in her classroom. But we are offering it at no cost for the remainder of the school year. So through June 30th, if you want to check us out in a couple classes, a couple schools, or for the whole district, however you want to do it, it's up to you. And we're completely fine either way. Even if you want to get it going for your summer school programs this year, that's great. So I did want to switch out of this PowerPoint really quickly. And Mary, I'll just pull up my screen, and if you wouldn't mind, talk to us a little bit about those challenges you saw in your classroom this year and how you were using NetRef to maybe meet some of those needs.
Yeah, so challenges this year for everybody. Obviously, this year was way different because we went, at least Putnam County, we went on spring break last year and we didn't come back. So that was just like it's a whoa moment for everybody. So obviously, you're taken from having your kids directly in front of you where you can watch to having them at home, and you're like, oh, I'm going to rethink this entire thing. How do I keep up with them? How do I do attendance? Any of the things. So my classroom, I've taught with flipped learning, so the kids watch videos at home and come to class and they're prepared to do homework problems and practice together. I've used that method for about 4 years now. So it's always been, you come into class, you pick which practice you want to do, and then we do it. So they work on it individually. I pull small groups, so it's really known as personalized learning. So I've done that for about 4 years, and then we went into. Sorry, okay, let's try it again. So we went into this time of COVID. We're teaching from home, or we're in school, and it's all crazy. So we'll talk a little bit specific about tools to use with your remote classroom if you are teaching remote. But just to start with, looking at a personalized classroom, blended, one-to-one with devices, in the beginning, let's call it my first year of teaching, you're so focused, the teacher is on, are they all on the correct website? Are they all doing this? And then it's so hard to step back and remember, I'm teaching content, I'm teaching kids, and you're so worried about classroom management. So I'm at Harrison at TETC conference, and he was like, hey, let's try this. Same thing we're doing here today. And we tried it with my classroom, and then it morphed into trying it for the 8th grade, and our teachers loved it. And we're like, okay, like I really like this because I can focus on teaching. So looking at a few of these tools that we have on the screen. So at any given time, I can pull up NetRef, and this is my panel. So these would be my students. This is the test class that we use, that NetRef uses for presentations, but I can see what every student is on at any given time. So while in my class, it is rare that every student is on the same thing at the same time, if you were that teacher, you could easily look here and see that, or you can see which one's off task, which one's playing Among Us, or any other thing. So let's say you were going to walk them into only one thing. You could do an allow list. So on this list, you can edit it and put in, let's say for me, so if my kids need access to our LMS, we use Canvas. So I would allow Canvas. Let's say one of the practice that they can do for a lesson is an IXL. So I would turn IXL on. Let's say they need to use or create a Google Doc to represent what they learned. I could turn on Google Docs. So let's just say those are the 3 websites I want them on today. So I can create this allow list like Harrison's showing you below by toggling on those websites and then just click close and lock those students into an allow list only. So that tells me that at any given time, I don't have to worry about walking around to look at kids' computers because the only website they can access are the ones that I want them on. So let's say it's the opposite. Let's say it's free reign for research. So I can give them open domain to, the internet, but I want to turn off those ones that are a little bit sketchy. So this is where we can use a block list, so opposite of allow list. And this block list turns off any specific websites that I don't want them on. So for instance, Minecraft, I see on the page, that's not on topic. So, or let's call it Instagram or Facebook, any of those social media websites, I can turn those off. And the kids can have open reign of the web without those websites.
Marion, that's great. And you said because you've got so many different subjects going on in your classroom, at times it can be multiple sites. Is that right? So you've got 10 or 20 sites you're allowing them to use, or you're taking the opposite approach in this example here with the block list, where you're keeping the internet wide open, but there are some that you know for certain that you don't want them to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, real world examples. When I say allow list, that's when we're doing, our LMS and a few websites that they're allowed to be on that day for practice. The block list, if I'm walking them into Canvas, let's see, allow list again. If I'm walking them into Canvas to just take a test, I can do that on the allow list where that's the only thing that's allowed. So those are 2 that I use literally every day. So
let me jump in here too, Mary. Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some of the things you talked about at the very beginning were some of the things that a lot of teachers are struggling with, and that's that, as all these models are kind of pushed forward with hybrid and one-to-one and blended and everything kind of thrown into the, as a teacher, my question for you is like, this is great what you're showing. How hard was it? Is it really just flicking switches, or, is there like a long process of getting all these apps and websites loaded in there? Because I know from the IT side, sometimes that's the biggest challenge, is loading up a whitelist or loading up a block list. So what was that like on your end, Mary, just in terms of teacher? Because I know there's a lot of teachers probably listening today too.
So not much, honestly. And that's the beauty, I think, of the allow list is in my classroom when I design my lessons, obviously I say Canvas because that's my LMS and everything's locked in there. And then from there, as I build these activities, I pull from the same resources. And I think most of our teachers have those resources that they just love. So you put those in and then you toggle back and forth based on the day. And even further than that, Carl, NetRef has the function of scheduling, so they can actually schedule your classes to start and to end. So if you're talking about ease of use for a teacher, everything's within one click. And then even past that, I don't have to remember to clear my students when they leave my classroom, because that bell schedule automatically comes in and it clears it. So that from class to class, it's easy to remember. Everything's, one touch away, which is my favorite thing, because for some programs you dig and you dig and you dig and you're like, I still can't find it.
Yeah.
And here it really, really is like one touch.
Well, and on the IT side, again, I remember there's a program we used to use in our district that challenge was that kids were transitioning between classes. Yeah, you would have students show up to class and be like, well, now I can't get into anything unless I run back to the other teacher and have them unblock me. Or then it was a call to IT support to say, wipe everything out, or that today's a C day, we have an odd schedule, so we need to, those were like my nightmare scenarios. I spent all day just tracking down kids' laptops and Chromebooks and everything, just trying to figure that out. So that's good to hear that it's all automated in terms of your end. You've got your classes, your class list, you can turn them on, turn them off, and it's basically based. And it sounds like, is there a schedule? You said there's a schedule, so it does get uploaded. Is it, Harrison, do you guys work with that? Is it like a district works with you and they send you the schedule, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, and we didn't get into that at the beginning, Mary, when you started, but for those that are on the call, you may be wondering about integration. So you can see on the left-hand side, if I'm teaching, right, or if Mary's teaching, we have, we're at East High School and we've got a few classes over on the left-hand side. We're pulling that directly from your SIS. So we support direct integrations with some of the larger ones out there, PowerSchool Infinite Campus, Skyward. We also support One Roster and Ed5 standards, as well as Clever and ClassLink to use those. So we want to take the burden off of you, the IT directors, and anyone on the student information side that's on this call. We're really trying to automate the process so that Mary and teachers on their end, when they log in the first time, all these classes are already in there. And then on the bell schedules, Carl and Mary, to your point you just brought up, yes, so you just let us know what time each class occurs, and then if a teacher blocks the students for their class while they're taking a paper and pencil test, you don't have to worry about those students, Kirk, Jesse, Katie, all being blocked and going into the next class. NetRef behind the scenes will automatically turn everyone to green so that the next teacher that inherits those students can apply whatever rule they want to. And then Mary, you mentioned automating rules too, because we know what times class periods start as well. If you have an allow list, you can also set it up and say, every day I want my students only allowed on these 5 websites or these 5 applications. And you can put NetRef away and get back to teaching. And that's really the end goal. Mary, what were some other things that you use? You mentioned the allow list and the block list, kind of everyday things that you use for your students. Are there any other features on the teacher side that you really like, or your other teachers use?
Yes, so my favorite 2 features. So if we scroll over one of the students, you'll see an information button, and we click on that, and that gives you the history. So right here, you can tell. So let's say I just forgot to do my allow list or my block list, which you guys know as teachers, like, it happens. So I can just kind of see like integrity and honesty. And I start the semester up front, and I put this panel up on the board, and I was like, guys, this is what I can see, just to give them, expectations from the beginning. This is what I can see, and this is how we handle it if you don't follow those expectations. So middle school honors, I'm trying to prep them for that high school integrity and responsibility. So let's say I forget to do that, I'll pull up this whenever they're taking a test, and I can have they been on Canvas this entire time, or have they gone from Canvas to Google to Canvas to Google? And then it really, really changes those conversations that you have with those kids. And even past this list, you'll see on the right-hand side that there is a picture. So it takes a screenshot. I think, Harrison, is it every 5 seconds?
Yes, it's every 5 seconds we're taking a shot of what activity they spent for those 5 minutes or 10 minutes, to your point.
Yes. So this function, obviously, it can show you, like, are they Googling answers for a test? Is it vocabulary that they don't understand? So even past the cheating stage and seeing that, you as a teacher can identify what they actually need help on. So I think that's a unique part of having that screenshot. So backing up from that, it changes your conversation with your students from, hey, I suspect this, did you do it? And it kind of it's just awkward to like, hey, I saw that you did this. Let's talk about why. So I had a student recently, this is real classroom example from like 2 weeks ago. I saw that she was on Slater. So it was one of our open web work days. And typically they don't abuse that, but I noticed she was on Slater. And another one he was using like photo math and things like that. And it changes the conversation from like, hey, are you cheating, to, hey, let's look at how you use these tools in the real world. Because I know when I was in college, I used Slater, but I used it to, step by step work through a problem. And then I worked another one to make sure that I understood how to do those problems. So having this information of what they're using changes the conversation from, no, you can't do that, to let's look at how to use that appropriately and use it to benefit you. So having that history log, in my opinion, is vital to any kind of online integrity.
I just want to jump on here too, because I think what you just hit on, Mary, is extremely important for teachers out there that are listening. And I think it's easy to do the gotcha thing with these kind of tools, right? Like, hey, I caught you doing this, and there's times when maybe that's appropriate, but for the most part, what I like what you just said is that you're empowering the kids. You're not really saying like, hey, you're in trouble for this, but let's talk about what do we need to help you, or what you need to do to help yourself, which I guess our end goal in all of this, right? Especially middle school kids, you're trying to get them to be autonomous and organized, and this just kind of gives you that insight, which is nice. I do think that, like anything else, as teachers, you're going to have to be careful and mindful of what you do with that information. But I think what you just set up is a good model for teachers going forward with any tool they're using, but especially when you're talking about screen grabs and things like that. Because there are parents out there that want to know every single thing your kids are doing. What are they doing in your class, Mary, right now? I want to know. I want a screenshot of everything. And that's a whole nother conversation that needs to happen too. And maybe it's more with the principal and with the IT staff too about what those expectations are. But I applaud you for that kind of that modeling, that expectations, and then verbalizing that outwardly with the kids. I think is an important thing to do from day one.
Thank you. So a few things. So we'll come back to talking about history and I guess data on your students. And we've talked about how that changes the conversation with the students, but we'll also get to how it changes the conversation with the parents, Carl, like you just said. But there's one more thing I want to hit on. I talked about in-person learning. So with in-person learning, we all know this year has been the year of oh my goshes. So I was quarantined 3 different times. So 1 for my own COVID experience, 2 for exposure, and then extra days added on to those for my daughter's exposure in the daycare. So I've spent a lot of time working from home during this school year. So one really cool feature, on the right hand side, you can see a little box with an arrow. So this is like a screen share. So our district, we can use Zoom, but then like with NetRef, you can also just push those websites to your students. So yes, so you can share with specific students, which really makes it easy to individualize. You can also share a student screen with the rest of the class. So those are a couple features that I really liked with just working from home. Harrison, do you have anything else to add to screen share?
No, that's great. And messages, did you ever have to do that when you were remote in the fall?
So yes, actually. So messages too, and Carl, to go with the student relationship piece, when I was in person, there's times that a student is off task. Instead of calling them out in front of the entire class and embarrassing them, especially at the middle school level, you can send them a message individually and just say like, hey, let's get back to work, or hey, let's go. And I think relationships are the biggest part of your classroom. If you have a strong relationship with your students, then they're going to want to work for you. And I think doing, a subtle message like this gives them that opportunity to build a relationship with you instead of tearing it down and being embarrassed in front of their peers. Because, we wouldn't like that if it was a faculty meeting, or, calling out anybody just isn't great. So I have to remember that with my students. Also, you can do that with a whole class message. So when I was remote, or when I've been out for trainings and things, I can look on that NetRef page and I can message any student, even if I'm at home, and be like, hey, you need to get back to work. And then I come in the next day and they're like, Miss Kirk, I got this weird message, like, and it said this, like, were you watching? It's like, of course I was. So it just keeps the students, on task, what they're supposed to be. And I hate to think of it as an eye in the sky, but honestly, like, they know that it is.
I think it gives you insight. And I think that's the one thing that teachers have really, when I've been working with teachers throughout the country, they've talked about the challenges of being on a Zoom screen when you're remote or hybrid or whatever, and you see some faces and some kids have their cameras on, some kids don't. You have no idea where their eyes or their attention are. I mean, they could be doing anything. I mean, if their camera's off, especially, they may just have logged in and walked away. So it gives you another layer of insight, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think it goes to, you were just saying, Mary, that community building aspect of it that we lost when we switched to remote. You now have some ability to make a little bit better connections, learn about their interests, but also like, hey, let's get refocused here without, like you said, doing the all out embarrassing thing, like clicking on the all mute and saying, hey, I can see what you're doing on Zoom, then everyone gets embarrassed. So this way I like that's a feature there, because yeah, I've always I hate that part of it as a teacher, to not see what's happening with the other kids out there. I just see their faces and I'm hoping they're paying attention to what I'm doing. So having this up on the screen would be really powerful.
Absolutely. And Harrison, can you toggle at the bottom with the screens and the tabs? This is something else I missed when we first looked at it. This screen actually shows all of the tabs that they have listed. So my students at any given time, I tell them always check your email when you first come in, because our 8th grade team, like that's how we communicate with our students a lot. So I always see an email tab, and then I should see Canvas and whatever extra tool they're looking for. So I think, Carl, that's to your point, this is a unique feature of NetRef, is being able to toggle between tabs and screens to see what they're looking at.
So I can't be watching Netflix on one tab while I have, I'm sort of half paying attention to Canvas, but you can see right away, oh, there's a kid there. Jesse's on Snapchat. Well, I was also on Coursera, but switching over to Snapchat or NASA. Yeah, that's good.
Absolutely. I think that's a vital part of this. You talked a little bit about, sorry, I've got an echo. Okay, so we were talking about student relationships and like how it changes the conversation. It also changes the conversation once we get into reports with parents. So we can look at, engagement reports and things like that. And I know I'll let you guys talk a lot more about that. But even with those reports, you can take those into, student meetings with parents, and they're like, hey, what have my kids been doing? And you can say like, okay, his grade isn't awesome, and it's, because it's this. And just kind of hand them the paper, and they can see like, oh, they've spent so much more time on things that we're not supposed to be doing. And obviously, we as teachers can see this, and we can use that to kind of alter our allow list and block list. But on your open, research days, this changes the conversation with parents, and it flips it back on the student. You guys also,
Mary, you're saying, I ran this report for Caitlin in an English class, and if you were going to share this with for a parent-teacher conference, you just download this report and you'll share it with them and say, Spotify, eBay, and Pandora, they didn't have a good grade in your class. So if those were their top sites, that's how you use that report.
Yes. And and it shows you good and bad. So even, I know we focus a lot on those bad students and what they do, but you can do it for your classroom and for the good students too, and say like, hey, like this time on task is awesome, and just use it to brag on them, because we don't always want to focus on the bad. So, and even as a class, you can just, pull this data for the entire class and use that for those parent meetings, or for, just meetings with your admin. So if you're an administrator, pulling this, not as a gotcha for your teachers, but as a coaching tool. So like these are the websites your teachers or your students are on. This is where the most time is. How can we modify your allow list or your block list to make it work for you? So you're not, so you can actually focus on teaching, because that's what we're here for.
And Mary, that's a good point. I think we've had a lot of, particularly this year, because parents are becoming the teachers, after hours more so than they have in the past with their students. They've said, okay, what websites are good ones that you want us to be making sure our students are staying on when they're at home with us? You can pull this report here and say, Khan Academy, Duolingo, Scholastic. These are all programs that are great that we use a lot for blended learning in my classroom, and they'd be great if you use those at home as well.
Absolutely.
And I think this would help also parents. And I don't want to get into a realm where teachers are having to always be the ones that are always providing all this information for parents, because I always tell parents, it still comes down to parenting 101, and that's you, your eyes, your management. That said, I'll admit, and I'm a tech dad here, but just a few weeks ago, my middle child was woke up in the middle of the night and decided from about 2 to 5 a.m. to be on her Chromebook just surfing YouTube videos. And there weren't anything bad, but I'm like, I had no idea, nor would I ever have gotten an idea actually if I just hadn't stumbled across it. I'd heard some noise and I went over there and looked, but and so I asked the teacher, I was like, our particular teacher in our district, I said, what kind of tools do you have, or can you let me know like when that happens, or can you get an alert or something that says like, hey, so and so's on at this time, or can I set some sort of time limits or restrictions? And she unfortunately couldn't. They had some tools that they were using, but she said they were too complicated to figure out. And I don't blame her, honestly, I don't. I think that still falls a lot on the parent. But if you had some ability to do like what you just showed me, that little quick report or of a student, I would feel at least some peace of mind as a parent going, all right, so I have some backup here. I'm not going to rely just on you, but I have some backup as a parent. So I think that's important too, that the toggling. Is there a time restriction element, Harrison? Can you do that? I don't remember you showed me a couple things with NetRef, but can you do like, certain hours or the day or whatever, they can't get access to certain things?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for a district or a school or a grade, you can make it all the way down to a student level, but you can place students in groups essentially where you can decide at what times they're allowed to access that content. We work with a lot of districts this year that saw that exactly what you saw, Carl, with your kid, where they were, up at night and just distracted and not sleeping. So we actually turned off the internet from them on those school or district issued devices from, let's say, midnight to 6 a.m. so that they were actually sleeping. So all the rules and all the times that we're getting this activity for students, that's all customizable, down to the minute that you want to actually monitor students and allow them to use certain websites.
So can you just put that on my oldest daughter's phone then next? Because I need that. No.
Well, it sounds like maybe yesterday or whenever that was that maybe that was the case. But
yeah.
Well, Mary, I think you did a great job covering this side of the program, and thanks so much for walking us through that and how you use that day to day. And for those on the call, this is the first side to NetRef. So our first side is classroom management. We're trying to empower teachers to be able to keep students on task and make sure they're getting the most out of all of these ed tech tools that are being used so widely today. The second thing that we started to get into there a second ago is on the reporting side and on the learning analytics. So I'm going to switch gears here and go to what we call, you see in the top left is the teacher side. Now we're going to switch to our reporting side. And Mary, I know some of your administrators and even you have access to this side and are pulling some reports. What are a couple ones that your school likes to use in particular? We could start there, and then I can go through some of the other ones too.
Sure. So I mentioned coaching conversations earlier, where admin can pull data usage for any classroom. And our admin actually used that as a conversation with the teacher, not so much again as a gotcha, because that's not how our team is, but really like how can we use this tool to, full value. So how can you modify your allow list or block list to make it work for you? So that's one conversation that we have with our data usage. Another one is our rate of investment or return on investment. I serve on our Title I team, and every year we're presented with a budget, and then we have to decide what programs are we going to buy with this. So we may have, let's say, Mathia or IXL, any of these things that we've purchased licenses for, and you have to look at it from admin side. Is this worth renewing? So one, do my teachers like it? Two, do the students benefit from it? All of these things. So I'm looking at, let's see, Khan Academy. So here, if we had purchased 300 licenses and we only used 24, that might be something we look at, purchasing just a classroom set of licenses instead of purchasing it for the entire school. So we use it to make decisions like that on the Title I team, based on feedback from teachers, but then also looking at this return on investment sheet.
Yeah, that's great. Go ahead, Carl.
I was going to say, when you talk about Title I, because that's federal funding, and I know that I just got off a call last week when we talked about CARES funding and ESSER funding, and there's about to be an influx of 200, I think over the course of the last year, 200 billion total dollars thrown at schools for learning loss and for ed tech tools, which also means there's going to have to be a flip side of that, which is the reporting side of it. And this made my ears perk up, because as an administrator, of course, I would spend weeks looking up for this information, going to each specific website to look at hitting statistics, and then having to trust whatever spreadsheet was sent my way by the company. So I think having something that it took you about 3 clicks. I looked at Harrison while you were doing that. Having something that fast, I think, is going to be important, especially going forward when those funds are released over the next few months. I think we're going to have some way of forward-facing or some sort of reporting mechanism that we can send back to constituents, because we have to identify where those funds are spent. So this could save districts tons of time and money as well, on top of everything else we were talking about, the engagement piece, which I think is great.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, particularly this year when a lot of programs were purchased to support remote learning. Zoom licenses were required and a lot of things. Now you can run these reports and look at them and say, hey, are we going to need this as we go back in person next year? Do we need to increase our licenses with this program? A lot of neat things that you can do, and this is kind of the first level that you need to look at to figure out where to take a deeper dive. And one thing I did want to switch gears and look at too is, if you see Khan Academy, Mary, you pointed out, let's say this is obviously a fictitious school, but our adoption rate is very low with Khan Academy. We can break this down further. So if we want to take a look at a particular site, we could say, we'll use Khan Academy as the example. We can see which teachers are incorporating Khan Academy into their instruction, and we're looking at last week as an example. But you can see Leanne and Margaret were 2 of the top users here, and we can get with them and say, hey, you do a good job of incorporating Khan Academy into your instruction. Would you mind leading a professional development or training session around Khan Academy for the other teachers? So this is a good place to start here. And then if you wanted to look at which students are using that particular program, Aaron and Dallas are doing a great job there, but if we scroll to the bottom, we can see that, maybe Lyle and Emily are ones that we need to get with and make sure that they're not falling behind.
I think the training aspect of that is I don't want to throw that under either. I mean, that what you just said was pretty key too, because that means as an administrator who's planning professional learning for this upcoming summer, I can quickly identify which campuses, what areas, not only the people that are the high-end users, and sometimes admittedly teachers don't always feel comfortable training. So you gotta, just like you were saying, Mary, about those conversations with the students, you gotta have that conversation with the teacher before you say, hey, you're the power user, go do it. I do think though, this would guide me as someone who's gonna re-up a lot of these subscriptions, and ultimately I'm the one signing the check. I want to see, like, okay, is campus A not using it? If they're not, why? What is the reason? Is there another tool that they're using that we're not aware of, or maybe that they're using it, they just adopted on their own? And should we have some synergy or some syncing there of like what's the best tool for us as a district to use, just so there's some consistency there? So I think that part of it alone, having an informed professional learning plan, I mean, you can then personalize it going forward and just pull out the teachers that need help. That's another tool that I wish I would have had as an administrator all those years, instead of just digging around and trying to take guesses, because it is qualitative mostly. It's like, who's using BrainPop today? And then like 5 people say, yeah, I'm using it. And so we can't get rid of it because a few people said they're using it, or someone said they think they know someone who's using it. Now I say, boom, let me go and see who's using BrainPop, who's using Khan Academy. And I've got at least the data on my end. And then of course, then you can do anything you want to with the data at that point, but having the data is the first step.
That's a really good point. Well, I think we're almost ready for Q&A time. So what I did want to do is show one last report really quickly. It's our engagement report. It came out of the, kind of the last semester, last year, beginning of COVID and remote learning, where based on feedback from some of our other partners like Mary, they said that it was really difficult for them to take attendance right now. Obviously, the students weren't face-to-face. So what we did was we came up with a way to take attendance remotely based on how much time they were spending on the required tools. Now, as we go back into in-person learning, we've gotten a lot of feedback from our partners that this will continue to be used as a way to measure true attendance or engagement. So are they actually, physically we see them sitting in their desk, but behind the screen, are they spending time on the programs we want them to be on? So what you can do is we'll select the engagement tag here. That engagement tag, what we're doing now is we're aggregating all the websites that we deem as educational as a district or a school. This could be 20 programs, this could be 100, 200, it's all up to you. You add them, and then you tell us what minimum amount of time do you want them to spend each day? I'm just going to put 15 minutes. Obviously, this is just an example, but you would probably put an hour or two for your school. We'll select a school and we'll take a look. Actually, we'll look at a classroom and we'll take a look at the Spanish class here for last week. And when I run this report, again, what it's showing you on this pie chart, 80% of our students spent more than the minimum amount of required time on the programs we want them to. So if you think about this, you can use it for attendance, or you mentioned some of those students that you really want to keep an eye on, and there are probably intervention programs for reading or math that they need to be spending 30 minutes a day on. You can add those here, run it for that group of students, and then figure out, okay, which students are not meeting that threshold. And if I scroll down, that's where I get those individual lists that I can download and flag for, maybe Caitlin on Wednesday and Thursday of last week. She did not meet the minimum threshold. That's okay. Maybe she was sick on Wednesday and Thursday, so we know not a big deal there. But if I scroll down, I see Aaron and Dallas. They were absent all last week, and we know they weren't sick. So what's going on? We probably want to get with those students, and maybe if their siblings, get with their parents and figure out how we can help support them and get back on track. So this is a really neat report that I think will evolve over time. It started with remote learning, but again, it's one of those neat things that I think that came out of last year that we can take into next year and improve upon what we're already doing. All right, so let me stop sharing this screen, and then Emily, I think we'll open it back up for Q&A.
Yes, great. And we do have a lot of questions, so all three of you get ready. So first one, folks just wanted to confirm that NetRef does work at school, at home, and a combination of all of those settings.
I'll take that. Yep, that's correct. So, and not only that, it'll work at all four of those, or in all three of those situations. But like I said before, when Carl asked the question, you can pick what times that NetRef is running and reporting. So it's all up to you, and it can be, if you just want it to report at your district on your own network, then we can set it up that way. Or if you want it 24/7, we can do it that way as well.
Great. All right, here's a scenario for you. Let's say YouTube is blocked for students during instruction. If a teacher presents a video that is on YouTube, will the students be able to see it, or will the teacher have to unblock YouTube in NetRef in order to show the video?
Sorry, Emily, would you mind repeating that question?
Yeah, boiled down, I think it's if you've got YouTube set up on your block list, is the teacher still able to show a YouTube video, or is her device affected as well?
Oh, okay, gotcha, that makes sense. No, so the teacher would then be able to share their screen and show that YouTube video if you wanted to do it that way. But another thing that Mary mentioned was the subdomains for the allow list. So you can get really granular, and you could pick one specific YouTube video that you wanted your students to watch, and just lock them into that that video in this case for YouTube, and that way you don't have to worry about them going off task. Mary, is that something that I think you were mentioning that with Canvas, but do you use that for YouTube as well?
Yes, so that, and especially Khan Academy, and my kids, honors kids, it's a rabbit hole after rabbit hole. So I do the same thing. It's that it's a more specific URL that you can lock them into on that website.
I think probably the number one thing that most teachers have issue with is they'll have like their Canvas site set up, and then they'll embed the YouTube video in the Canvas site for the kids to watch later or asynchronously. Mm-hmm. And so you're saying you could have just toggle on the Canvas switch and then toggle on the specific YouTube switches. So then the kid has no problem they're not limited, and they're not hitting the related next possible video about hamsters running through cages and things.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, a rabbit hole is a good description of YouTube. As valuable as it can be. So Harrison, I think you touched on this a little bit, but this question has a couple levels to it, so we'll try to unpack it. So how does NetRef process internet access after school hours? I see that there is a hierarchy with classes, and what a student accesses varies depending on what class there is. Is there also a master allow deny list at the school level rather than the class level for true take-home one-to-one students?
Yeah, so the latter part of that question, we do have school and district-wide policies that you can put in place as an administrator. So if you just want YouTube blocked for, maybe your elementary, but your middle and high schools, you want to allow it, you can do that there. And then it falls to the teacher, so they can get more granular at their level if they want to block things further on their end or lock students into particular sites there. In terms of how we work outside of the school network, we have apps or an extension depending on the device that you have that is added to that student's account or to the device itself, again, depending on what type of device you have. We didn't mention it, but we work on Chromebooks, any devices running Windows 10 and Mac OS as well.
Great, and thanks for saying that, because that was a question that came in. You got ahead of me. But in that same vein, is NetRev running in the background automatically on students' devices when they log in to the district system, or is an application to download on the device? Talk a little bit about the setup of NetRev.
Sure. So it really is quick. It takes about 20 to 30 minutes depending on your setup, but there are 2 steps. The first one is we would integrate with your SIS. So again, I named a few earlier. Most of the common ways to integrate are through OneRoster or EdFi or ClassLink or Clever. We support all of those, but you would just enter your credentials and then tell us what time you want us to sync with your SIS. So if it happens at 8 o'clock at night, the neat thing is any new students that are enrolled or if they switch classes, all of that is done daily, so that when Mary logs in the next day and she had 2 new students added to her class, she doesn't have to do anything in NetRev. They're automatically there. So that's the first step, really quick. And then the second one is pushing out the NetRev app to your particular device. So if it's a Chromebook, we use a Chrome extension that you would push to the student's profiles in Google Admin. If it's a Windows machine or MacBook, you would push the NetRev app out through an MDM, or you could use Active Directory. You could deploy it via group policy for those Windows machines as well.
Great. Mary, one for you, and this is, you had talked about how you're really open with your students that NetRev is in place and that you're looking at that data. Can you just talk a little bit more about how you, I guess, position that to students at the beginning of the year and sort of navigate that kind of eye in the sky view that NetRev gives?
Yeah, so when we come into the classroom, obviously you're setting up your expectations. So I share my screen to our panels and I pull up NetRev and I say, guys, on any given day, this is what I can see for you. So, and I'll show them, I'll have demo it with a student, hey, pull something up. And then they'll see how in live time it comes up to the board. And then I can click on information and kind of show them those things. So I set it up as the conversation of your middle school students. You're learning how to manage your time. I have a flipped classroom, so obviously asynchronous isn't a new thing to me, but it is to middle school students. So teaching those students how to kind of divvy out their time and their schedules is kind of how I go to this. So we talk about how to set up a week in an asynchronous classroom. So your deadline's here. What other activities do you have going on? Make your schedule. And then from talking to them about that and that schedule is where I kind of go into NetRev and I'll say, at any given time, I'm going to look at this and kind of we'll compare it to what you've done throughout the week and kind of see how you're staying on pace and what we can do to tweak your schedule to meet your deadline. So I really use it as a side tool, not again like a gotcha, but they know that loving discipline, it's going to happen, it's going to come, and they just know, she's going to check this. It's the expectation, and then that really it changes the conversation from, hey, did you do this, to give them the chance to lie about it. It's like, hey, I saw that you did this. Let's talk about it and what needs to happen instead, or how we can use this better. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it did. And if it didn't, that person can write for more explanation. So we'll stay tuned for that. Harrison, so you showed the teacher dashboard. As a IT director or an admin, am I able to see each individual teacher's dashboard, or is there some sort of school view that I can access?
Yeah, that's a neat thing. So you can do it either way. You can set up a school view where you can see all the students at once, or we've added the ability to mimic teachers' accounts if they call in for troubleshooting. So for your help desk or anything like that, you can just launch another teacher's account. If they call you and say, hey, can you look at this student for me? You can quickly find that teacher and then launch their account.
Okay. And again, that's great for those conversations around professional development and what's being used in the classroom. Let's see. Oh, and apologies for the echo here. How does NetRef handle when kids go incognito on their browsers? Is the system still able to pick that up and know which sites they're on?
So if it's incognito, it depends on what device it is. For a Chromebook, what we would do is just disable that in Google Admin, you can disable that from occurring from incognito. On the Windows machines and MacBooks, the neat thing that we do is we're taking a screenshot of the entire screen, not just the browser. So students can open up an incognito window. They could have 2 or 3 different browsers. We've seen that where they have Firefox and Edge, Chrome, and they're all trying to hide it around. We take a screenshot of the entire screen so you can see when that's occurring. So it's not an issue.
Okay, students are very clever.
Yes.
Mary, another one for you about parents. How do you talk to parents about the use of NetRef and how you're using that in the classroom, and kind of do you get any resistance from parents around that?
Not a ton. And that, I think the parents obviously, like, they want to see it, they want to know, and it's very rare that we have any pushback. I have an open phone policy, so just if I go into high school, if I go into a job, I expect to be able to use my phone when I need to. So I prep my students for that in the classroom. So my first year, it was no phones and it was a fight, and every year since then, I've said, okay, you can have your device, you can have your phone, you can text your mom, whatever you need to do. So I've not had to fight that with parents very much. As far as how I use it with them, it changes the game when it comes to parent meetings, because it's typically, if you call a parent meeting, your student's struggling or you have a worry, and I'll print this data and use it, whether it's good or whether it's bad, because that really narrows it down. Is it a time issue? Is it a content issue? So you can narrow down what the issue is in that meeting with the parent, with the student, and compare it to what they're seeing at home. If it's something, well, the teacher's not explaining this to me, let's look at where their time was spent. And if it was online instead of in a small group with me, then you can kind of pinpoint that. So I think the data really just narrows it down to where you can decide which one is the issue and how to address it with the parents.
Yeah, that's good. Again, like you said, it's a great tool for conversation starters and data around that conversation that you're already planning to have. Harrison, this question came in when you had up the time report, basically, and on that rule application pie chart, could you explain what the difference between allowed and allow list is?
Sure. So allowed is the everything's open mode. So that's just as your internet is today, where everything's allowed. The allow list is the amount of time that they're spending in a teacher's rule. And that would mean if you are keeping them on just 5 websites or 10 websites, all the time they spend under that allow list rule, that was that pie chart. That's what that was conveying.
Okay, great. How does NetRef comply with privacy issues, especially when kids may be learning at home or using the devices at home? And Mary, also for you, I guess this is a similar parent question, but do you encounter any issues in terms of privacy?
I have a wild scenario. We did have a parent that was signed in to a student's account, and there's some wild things on that. But that was the only like whoa that we've had as a district, and I think that was addressed, and it's kind of in the past. But Harrison, if you want to talk about privacy more.
Yeah, sure. So, NetRef is FERPA, COPA, and CIPA compliant. We take it very seriously. Our parent company is Verite Group, and security and network engineering and privacy are all at our core skill set. So we've done a lot to make sure that your students' data is safe, and we value, it's totally up to your district as to what you want to do with that data. Most of our partners this summer will purge the data, so they just keep it on a yearly rotating basis, run reports, the return on investment, make sure that they know what programs to invest in the following school year, delete the data, and then we start all over again. So yeah, that's a great question. A big strength of ours is making sure that we keep that data secure and that it's all yours. So that's up to the district or the school as to how you want to use it.
And I'll just add, as an administrator that's had access to data, sometimes this is a conversation that you need to have with everybody on your admin team. And what happens when you do uncover something that a student is looking at or something that a student's researching, because now you have that insight. So with great power comes great responsibility, right? So having those conversations before, I think that's a good thing of a tool like NetRef can do, is it'll give you that insight. So now it's like, how do I use that wisely? So again, I think this is independent of anything else, but especially when you have this kind of insight that NetRef offers, I feel like you want to make sure that you're having those conversations, because there are things you'll see, and Mary just said she didn't tell us what it was, but there are things that they can get into, or that a parent might be able to get into on a student device that's going to be an uncomfortable conversation. So there needs to be a plan set up on the policy side for districts when they do that as well.
Yeah,
and Carl, to your point, we see on the acceptable use policies, that's a great place to build that in and make sure you're having those conversations about what a tool like NetRef is in place for, and that's keeping students on task and making sure that districts are getting a good return on investment and return on learning out of these ed tech tools. That's it. That's those are the sole reasons that it's in place for.
Yeah. So a couple questions about blocked or sites you don't want students on. Does a teacher get a notification when a student goes to an inappropriate or blocked site?
So you'll see it in your history list that we showed earlier when Mary was talking about that little I button, the little info button. When you click on that, yes, you will get a list of all the sites that they attempted to go to and when they were, when it was blocked.
Okay. And on the flip side of that, what does it look like to a student when they try to access a blocked site?
Sure. Mary, did you want to answer that? I'm happy to, but I didn't know if you had any stories about them looking up at you when it was blocked or whatnot.
It's just funny. It's so funny because you get that look from the kid that's like this, where they look up from their computer and they got contacted you. So pretty much we use Google Chrome, and the screen just like on their Chrome page, it just goes gray and it says this site has been blocked by NetRef, and we've made it into a verb, and our kids say you NetRef me. So you always get the look from the kids.
Yeah, it's just a blank. I was just seeing if Mary had any funny stories, but it's just a blank screen that says, "Hey, unfortunately, you're not allowed to go to this site at this time." So that's it.
I love that NetRef is a verb, so that's great. You've been NetRefed. So some more questions on functionality or how NetRef works on the device and within the system. Can a teacher be using NetRef while using other resources on their own device? For example, can a teacher use Firefox and NetRef independently? Again, this person's just saying, trying to figure out how much NetRef takes over a machine or a device.
Certainly. So Mary, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about how you use it, but it's just you can have NetRef up in a tab in your browser, and you can use multiple browsers if you wanted to, but NetRef's just a website. So it'll just be a tab in your browser, and you can use IXL or Khan Academy or any of those programs to instruct and just kind of have NetRef in the background.
And that's exactly what I do. When I come in the morning, it's email, and then Canvas and NetRef, and those are my three, and then my YouTube for music, what I use in the classroom, and those are my tabs every morning. So when I go in for allow list or block list, it's just a tab, and then it just hides in the corner, and so you need to access it again.
Yeah, so it's just another tool, like you said, on your dashboard. And Harrison, how does NetRef work with district filtering tools and firewalls?
Good question. So we work in conjunction with those. There's no issue. We are the next level down. So, firewall, content filter, then NetRef. And again, the end goal of NetRef is really to empower the teachers to make it very granular at their level. So your firewall and content filter, those are going to get rid of all the really bad stuff out there. And then NetRef is in place for the teachers to get rid of all the distracting content and make sure that they're staying on